The wrench slipped from Caleb Mercer's hand and clanged across the concrete floor just as his phone buzzed for the third time. He glanced at the screen without answering. Unknown number. Again. Not now, he muttered, sliding back under the old blue sedan balanced on the lift. The suspension bolt finally gave way with a sharp snap. Caleb let out a slow breath, wiped the grease from his forehead with the back of his arm, and looked toward the waiting room. Through the dusty window, his 12-year-old son was finishing homework at a folding table beside the coffee machine, headphones on, completely focused. That sight settled him every time. 3 years ago, after losing his wife to cancer, Caleb had promised himself one thing: Noah would never have to wonder if his father would show up. That promise shaped every decision he made, even the bad ones. He refused loans. He refused charity. And lately, he had started refusing jobs that might keep him away from home after dark, even when the garage desperately needed the money. Business at Mercer Auto Service had slowed with the colder weather. Bigger repair chains had moved closer to town, offering discounts Caleb couldn't afford to match. Every evening he sat at the tiny office desk trying to stretch another week from numbers that simply refused to cooperate. Still, when customers walked through the garage door, he treated every car as if someone he loved would be riding inside it. It wasn't good business. It was simply the only way he knew how to work. Before we get any further, I'd love to know a little about you. How old are you, where are you watching from, and have you ever found yourself in a situation that changed because of one small act of kindness? The front bell jingled. An older woman stepped carefully inside, shaking rain from a faded navy umbrella. She wore a light beige raincoat, sensible walking shoes, and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime solving her own problems. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said with an apologetic smile. "My car stalled about a mile away. Someone helped me coast it into your parking lot." Caleb recognized the blue sedan immediately. "It wouldn't start?" "It coughed twice," she replied. "Then it simply gave up." Noah looked up from his homework. "I can grab the scanner, Dad." Caleb smiled. "Thanks, buddy." Within 15 minutes, Caleb found the problem. A worn battery terminal had corroded enough to interrupt the connection. The replacement part cost very little, and installing it took even less time. The older woman reached into her purse. "How much do I owe you?" Caleb looked at the tiny receipt in his hand. He could use every dollar. The electric bill was due Friday. Noah needed new basketball shoes before the season started. And one of the garage compressors had been making a sound that usually meant an expensive repair wasn't far away. He looked back at the woman. Then he quietly folded the receipt in half. "Nothing today." She blinked. "I'm afraid I don't understand." "You were lucky it was something small," Caleb said. "Drive home safely. That's payment enough." For a moment, she simply stared at him, as though she'd forgotten how to respond to unexpected kindness. "My name is Margaret," she finally said. "Caleb." She smiled warmly. "Then thank you, Caleb." After she drove away, Noah leaned against the shop door. "You really needed that money." "I know. So why didn't you charge her?" Caleb watched the taillights disappear into the gray afternoon. "Because someday," he answered quietly, "I hope if you're ever stranded somewhere, somebody remembers you're a person before you're a customer." Neither of them noticed that less than an hour later, Caleb's phone would ring again. This time, the woman on the other end wouldn't be asking about a car. The phone rang again just as Caleb was locking the front door of the garage. He almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. "Mercer Auto Service." There was a brief pause before a calm, professional voice answered. "Is this Caleb Mercer?" "It is. My name is Claire Ashford. My mother was at your garage this afternoon." Caleb immediately pictured Margaret's warm smile. "I hope everything's all right." "She's fine," Claire replied. "Actually, she told me what you did." Caleb leaned against the counter, glancing through the office window. Noah was stacking chairs in the waiting area, humming softly to himself. "It wasn't much. According to my mother, you repaired her car and refused payment. It was a small repair. Small or not, I'd like to reimburse you. You don't have to. I insist. Her tone wasn't rude. It was simply the voice of someone accustomed to solving problems efficiently. Caleb smiled to himself. Tomorrow morning works if you really want to stop by. I'll be there at 9. The call ended before either of them said goodbye. The next morning arrived with clear skies and crisp autumn air. Noah unlocked the office while Caleb rolled open the garage doors. You think she's actually coming? Noah asked. Probably. Rich people usually send somebody. Caleb chuckled. Maybe she isn't like most people. At exactly 9 o'clock, a dark gray SUV pulled quietly into the parking lot. No flashing entourage. No security detail. Just one woman stepping out in a charcoal wool coat, carrying a leather folder instead of a purse. She looked younger than Caleb expected, maybe late 30s, with tired eyes that suggested she hadn't slept well in a long time. You must be Caleb. And you're Claire. She extended her hand. Thank you for seeing me. Her handshake was confident but not cold. Noah peeked from behind the office door before disappearing back inside. Claire noticed. Your son? Yeah. How old? 12. She nodded, as though filing the information away. I won't take much of your time. She opened the folder and slid an envelope across the counter. I estimated labor, parts, and what I believe your time is worth. Caleb didn't touch it. I already told you over the phone. I know. It wasn't about the money. It never is for people like you. Caleb frowned slightly. What does that mean? She hesitated. I didn't mean to offend you. No offense taken. I'm just curious. Claire looked around the small garage. Every tool had its place. The office furniture was old but clean. The coffee pot had probably survived 2 decades. Nothing about the place suggested comfort, but everything suggested care. My mother says you fixed her car because she reminded you of someone. Caleb shook his head. I never said that. No? I fixed it because she needed help. Claire looked genuinely surprised. You didn't wonder who she was? No. You didn't recognize her name? Should I have? She studied him for several seconds before letting out the smallest laugh. No. I suppose not. She carefully pushed the envelope back into her folder. I appreciate what you did. I appreciate you coming. For a moment, it seemed the conversation had reached its natural end. Then Claire looked toward the parking lot where her mother's blue sedan sat. Can I ask you something professionally? Sure. If that were your mother's car. Caleb waited. Would you let her keep driving it? The question hung between them. He walked outside with Claire following behind. Opening the hood, he inspected the engine again before crouching beside the front wheel. The battery connection is fixed, he said. The brakes will probably need attention within the next year. The tires should be replaced before winter. And the steering has a little play that I'd want checked eventually. Claire listened without interrupting. So? She folded her arms. Would you tell her to stop driving? Caleb stood and wiped his hands with a shop towel. No. Claire blinked. No? I'd tell her exactly what needs attention. And then? And then I'd let her make an informed decision. What if she's making the wrong one? That's different. How? My job is to explain the condition of the car. He looked directly at her. It isn't my job to decide another adult's life. Something in Claire's expression changed. Not anger. Disappointment. Almost frustration. You don't understand. Then help me. She glanced toward the sedan before speaking quietly. My mother nearly died in a traffic accident 6 years ago. Caleb said nothing. Ever since then, Claire continued, every time she drives away, I wonder if it'll be the last time I see her. For the first time since arriving, she didn't sound like a CEO. She sounded like a daughter who had spent years carrying the same fear. Caleb understood that feeling better than he wished he did. But understanding someone didn't always mean agreeing with them. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. "I really am." Claire looked at him, hoping he'd say something else. Something that would solve the problem. Instead, Caleb simply repeated the one thing he believed was true. "I can tell you what's wrong with the car." He paused. "But I can't decide what freedom should cost another person." Claire drove away with more questions than answers. Caleb watched the gray SUV disappear around the corner before turning back toward the garage. He wasn't angry with her. If anything, he felt sorry for her. Fear had a strange way of dressing itself up as certainty. The more frightened people became, the more convinced they were that control was the only answer. "Dad?" Noah stepped outside carrying 2 mugs of coffee, one filled with hot chocolate instead. "You've been standing there for like 5 minutes. Caleb smiled and accepted the paper cup. "Was I?" "You do that when you're thinking." They sat together on the old wooden bench beside the garage door. Cars rolled past on the county road, their tires humming softly against the cool pavement. "So," Noah asked carefully, "was that lady mad at you?" "I don't think so. She didn't look happy." "Being unhappy doesn't always mean someone's angry." Noah considered that for a moment before taking another sip. "Then why did she come?" Caleb stared toward the empty parking space where Margaret's sedan had been the day before. "Because she loves her mom." "And that's a bad thing?" "No." "Then what's the problem?" Caleb laughed quietly. "If life were simple enough to answer in one sentence, mechanics like me would probably be out of business." Noah grinned. "You compare everything to fixing cars. Occupational hazard." The rest of the morning passed quietly. Caleb replaced brake pads on a pickup truck while Noah swept the floor between homework assignments. It wasn't glamorous work, but there was comfort in routine. Every bolt tightened. Every tool returned to its drawer. Every hour earned honestly. Just after lunch, the familiar blue sedan rolled slowly into the lot. Margaret climbed out before Caleb could reach the office door. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." She held a small pie wrapped in a checkered kitchen towel. "I make apple pie whenever I'm nervous." Caleb smiled. "So this is either very good news or very bad news. It depends on how you look at it." She handed him the warm pie. "For you and your son. You really didn't have to." "I know." She looked around the garage before lowering her voice. "May we talk for a minute?" Caleb nodded and led her to the bench outside. Margaret rested both hands on her cane, though Caleb noticed she hardly leaned on it. "My daughter came yesterday." "She did. I imagine she asked a great many questions." "A few." Margaret sighed. "Claire has always believed every problem has a solution if she works hard enough." "That sounds like a good quality." "It usually is." She smiled faintly. "Unless the problem is another human being." Caleb remained silent. "I know what you're thinking." "I don't think I know enough to think much of anything." She laughed. "That's probably why I like you." For a few moments they simply watched leaves drift across the parking lot. Finally Margaret spoke again. 6 years ago, I was in an accident. Claire had mentioned it. I recovered." She looked down at her hands. "My body healed faster than my daughter did." Caleb didn't interrupt. "Ever since then, she checks on me constantly. Calls every morning. Tracks my appointments. Orders groceries before I realize I'm running low. She even hired someone to mow my lawn after I told her not to." "She means well," Caleb said gently. "I know." Margaret smiled sadly. "That's what makes it so difficult." She wasn't complaining about an unkind daughter. She was grieving the slow disappearance of ordinary freedoms. "I don't want Claire to spend every day worrying about me. And I certainly don't want to hurt her." She looked directly at Caleb. "But I also don't want permission slips for the rest of my life." Those words stayed with him. Permission slips. He thought about Noah. Since Emily's death, he had packed every school lunch, checked every homework assignment, approved every weekend plan, and worried over every decision that involved his son. Had he been protecting Noah? Or had he simply become Afraid of losing the only family he had left? Margaret stood, smoothing the front of her raincoat. I should get going. Before walking away, she paused beside her car. Thank you? For fixing my car? She shook her head. No. For speaking to my daughter as if both of us deserved the same respect. Caleb watched her drive away at a careful, steady pace. He couldn't shake the feeling that this family wasn't asking him to fix a car anymore. They were asking him to stand in the middle of a conversation that had been broken for years. Saturday mornings were usually the busiest at Mercer Auto Service. By 8 o'clock, 3 cars were already lined up outside the garage, and Caleb had grease on his hands before he'd finished his first cup of coffee. Noah was organizing invoices at the front desk when Margaret's blue sedan quietly pulled into the lot again. She stepped out, smiling as always. I promise I'm not becoming your most difficult customer. Caleb laughed. I've had worse. I actually came to ask you something. She held up a folded community concert flyer. Our church orchestra is playing next Friday. I wondered if you and Noah might like to come. Before Caleb could answer, another vehicle turned into the parking lot. The same gray SUV. Claire stepped out, stopping the moment she saw her mother's car. For a brief second, either woman moved. Then Claire walked over, trying to keep her voice calm. You told me you were staying home today. Margaret's smile faded. I changed my mind. You didn't answer your phone. It was in my purse. Claire took a slow breath, clearly trying not to let frustration take over. I was worried. I know. You know because I tell you every single time. And I hear you every single time. Caleb stayed where he was. This wasn't his conversation. Claire finally noticed the concert flyer in Margaret's hand. You drove all the way here, to invite him to a concert? Margaret looked genuinely confused. Why wouldn't I? Claire hesitated. Because. She stopped herself. Margaret finished the sentence for her. Because you think I shouldn't be driving. Silence settled over the parking lot. Finally, Claire spoke softly. I just want to know you're safe. And I want to know I'm still trusted. Neither voice was raised. Neither woman was cruel. That somehow made the distance between them feel even larger. Margaret turned toward Caleb. I should probably go. As she opened the driver's door, a small electronic chime sounded from somewhere inside the car. Claire instinctively reached for her phone. A notification flashed across the screen before she could hide it. Margaret saw it. So that's how you always know where I am? Claire's face lost its color. It isn't what you think. It tells you every time I leave home, doesn't it? Caleb looked away, suddenly understanding pieces that had never fit together before. This had never been about a single old car. It wasn't even about driving. It was about fear becoming surveillance. Margaret closed the car door without getting inside. I knew you worried, she said quietly. I didn't know you were following me. Tears filled Claire's eyes. I started after your accident. I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining another phone call. I told myself it was temporary. She looked down at the phone in her hand. Then I never stopped. For the first time, Caleb understood both sides completely. Margaret hadn't been hiding small trips because she was reckless. She had been trying to protect one corner of her independence. Claire hadn't been tracking her mother because she wanted control. She had been trapped inside a fear she never learned how to put down. Standing between them, Caleb made a silent decision. He would not become evidence for either side. If they were ever going to find peace, it would have to begin with the truth, not with someone else choosing who was right. The shop felt quieter after Margaret and Claire drove away. Not because the noise had disappeared. The air compressor still rattled. A radio somewhere in the back played an old country song. Customers came and went with questions about brakes, oil changes, and strange engine noises. But Caleb couldn't stop thinking about the look on Claire's face when Margaret discovered the tracking app. It wasn't the expression of someone caught doing something cruel. It was the face of someone whose fear had slowly become a habit. Dad? Noah stood beside the workbench, holding a science permission slip. I forgot to tell you. Mrs. Jennings picked me for the regional robotics competition. Caleb smiled immediately. That's great. It is. Noah hesitated. But it's on Saturday. So? It starts at 7 in Columbus. Caleb instinctively reached for the calendar hanging beside the office door. Saturday was already packed. 3 major repair appointments. 1 transmission rebuild. A towing job scheduled before sunrise. If he cancelled, he'd lose nearly a full day's income. He stared at the calendar longer than he meant to. Noah quietly lowered the paper. It's okay. I don't have to go. Caleb looked at him. You were excited 30 seconds ago. I know. You should still go. Noah forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. You've got work. I understand. The words sounded strangely familiar. Not because Noah had said them. Because Caleb had heard almost the same sentence from Margaret. I understand. The sentence people used when they stopped asking for something they needed. After Noah walked back inside, Caleb remained standing in front of the calendar. For years, he told himself he was sacrificing everything for his son. Working longer. Spending less. Never taking vacations. Never asking for help. But somewhere along the way, survival had quietly become the reason for every decision. Maybe he wasn't giving Noah security anymore. Maybe he was teaching him not to ask. Late that afternoon, Claire returned. This time she didn't arrive in a polished SUV. She came alone in a simple sedan, parked near the edge of the lot, and walked inside carrying no folder, no envelope, and no businesslike confidence. She looked exhausted. I owe you an apology. Caleb set down the socket wrench in his hand. You don't owe me anything. I do. She looked around to make sure no customers were nearby. I tried to make you part of an argument that wasn't yours. Caleb nodded slightly. I figured that out. Claire let out a long breath. My mother hasn't answered my calls since yesterday. I'm sorry. I don't blame her. She rubbed her forehead. I honestly believed I was protecting her. You were. She looked up. But protection isn't the same thing as permission. Those words surprised her. I've spent years making decisions for hundreds of employees. She gave a tired smile. People expect me to have answers. They expect certainty. And somewhere along the way, she searched for the right words. I forgot that my mother isn't one of my employees. Caleb leaned against the workbench. You know what the hardest part is? She waited. When somebody loves you enough to worry all the time, it's easy to mistake their fear for your responsibility. Claire looked at him quietly. You've been there. My wife passed away 3 years ago. Her expression softened immediately. I'm sorry. After that, he glanced toward the office where Noah was reading. I started making every decision for my son. What changed? I'm beginning to wonder if I ever asked what he wanted. Claire followed his eyes. He seems like a good kid. He is. So was I. She laughed softly, almost embarrassed. My mother used to tell everyone I was the most independent child she'd ever seen. What happened? I became successful. She smiled sadly. And then I convinced myself I could prevent every bad thing from happening. Silence settled between them. Not awkward. Honest. Finally Claire spoke. I'd like to ask one more favor. Caleb raised an eyebrow. It isn't about taking my side. I'm listening. My mother won't come home for dinner tomorrow. She cancelled. I think. Claire paused. I think she'd come if someone she trusted invited both of us. Caleb immediately shook his head. I don't belong in family dinners. I know. I'm not asking you to fix us. She looked directly at him. I'm asking because she listened to you without feeling judged. Caleb thought about it for several moments. Then he looked toward Noah again. His son was quietly folding the robotics permission slip and sliding it into his backpack without another word. That hurt more than Caleb expected. He finally understood something Margaret had tried to tell him. People stop asking when they believe the answer is already no. He turned back to Claire. I won't tell your mother what to do. I wouldn't expect you to. I won't tell you you're right. I know. And if we all sit down together. Claire nodded. Everyone speaks for themselves. For the first time since they had met, Claire smiled without the weight of authority behind it. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. As she walked toward the door, Caleb picked up Noah's permission slip from the counter. Some conversations, he realized, could change a family. Others had to begin at home first. Sunday evening arrived with the kind of quiet that only small towns seem to understand. The streets emptied early. Porch lights flickered on one by one. The air carried the smell of fireplaces and fallen leaves, reminding everyone that winter wasn't far away. Caleb parked his pickup outside Margaret's modest brick house and looked at Noah. You don't have to come in if you don't want to. Noah shrugged. I kind of want to meet the lady who makes those apple pies. Caleb laughed. Fair enough. Margaret answered the door before they had a chance to knock twice. Noah, she said warmly. I'm so glad you came. She welcomed them inside, where the smell of roasted chicken and fresh bread filled the house. Family photographs covered one wall, Claire as a little girl riding a bicycle, high school graduations, vacations at lakes, birthdays, ordinary moments collected over decades. Nothing about the home suggested wealth. It suggested history. A few minutes later, another car pulled into the driveway. Claire stepped inside carrying a simple salad bowl instead of a laptop or briefcase. She looked nervous. Not because she was leading a board meeting. Because she was walking into her mother's home without knowing whether she'd still be welcome. Hi, Mom. Margaret nodded politely. Claire. No hug. No anger. Just careful distance. Dinner began with quiet conversation about the weather, Noah's school, and the church orchestra concert. Caleb intentionally stayed away from subjects that could reopen old wounds too quickly. For a while, it almost felt normal. Then Margaret reached for the basket of dinner rolls. I'll be driving to Cincinnati next month. Claire froze. Your what? My college roommate is turning 73. I promised I'd be there. Claire slowly set down her fork. Mom. It's only a few hours. You know that's not the point. It actually is the point. The room fell silent. Claire took a careful breath. I worry because I love you. Margaret answered just as calmly. And I appreciate that. But every decision I make has become a discussion. What route I drive. What groceries I buy. What doctor I see. What time I leave the house. She looked directly at her daughter. I don't feel protected anymore. I feel supervised. Claire lowered her eyes. I never wanted that. I know. Then why does it feel that way? Neither woman raised her voice. Neither accused the other. That somehow made every sentence heavier. Caleb remained quiet until Margaret looked toward him. What would you do? He shook his head gently. I don't think that's the right question. Claire looked disappointed. You said you'd come. I did. But not to choose a winner. He folded his hands on the table. If I answer for either of you, the conversation ends. Both women waited. So let me ask something instead. He turned to Claire. If your mother agreed to stop driving tomorrow, would you stop worrying? Claire opened her mouth. Then closed it. After several long seconds, she whispered, No. Caleb nodded. He turned toward Margaret. If Claire never questioned another decision you made, would you feel completely free again? Margaret thought just as long. Finally, she smiled sadly. No. There would always be something between us now. Caleb leaned back in his chair. Then the car isn't the real problem. No one spoke. The real problem is that both of you have been trying to fix fear. He looked at Claire. You've been trying to control it. Then at Margaret. You've been trying to escape it. But fear doesn't usually disappear because someone wins. The room became so quiet that the ticking kitchen clock sounded unusually loud. At that moment, Noah cleared his throat. I don't think adults are the only ones who do that. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward him. He looked at his father. I didn't tell you about the robotics competition because I thought you'd say no. Caleb felt the words hit harder than any accusation ever could. I wasn't trying to lie. Noah's voice stayed soft. I just didn't want you to have one more thing to worry about. Caleb stared at his son, realizing he was hearing the same pattern repeated in a completely different family. Love. Fear. Silence. Different people. The same mistake. The drive home was quieter than usual. Noah looked out the passenger window while streetlights slid across the windshield one after another. Caleb kept both hands on the steering wheel, replaying his son's words from dinner. I didn't tell you because I thought you'd say no. He had spent 3 years believing he was protecting Noah from disappointment. Instead, he had taught him to expect it. When they pulled into the driveway, Caleb turned off the engine but didn't reach for the door. Hey, buddy. Noah looked over. I'm sorry. Noah blinked. For what? For making it easier to keep things from me than to talk to me. His son looked confused. You've never yelled at me. I know. Then why would I hide things? Caleb smiled sadly. Because you already knew what my answer would be. Either of them spoke for a moment. Finally, Caleb reached into the back seat, grabbed the folded robotics permission form, and handed it over. We're going. Noah stared at the paper. But you've got work. I'll reschedule. What if customers get mad? They'll survive. A slow smile spread across Noah's face. You mean it? I do. For the first time in weeks, Caleb saw the excitement return to his son's eyes. It reminded him how little children actually needed. Not perfect parents. Just parents willing to listen. The next morning, Caleb arrived at the garage before sunrise. He had barely finished unlocking the doors when a familiar gray SUV stopped outside. Claire stepped out holding a travel mug instead of a briefcase. I was hoping you'd be here. I usually am. She smiled faintly. I wanted to thank you. You don't have to. I do. She leaned against the hood of her SUV. I haven't had a real conversation with my mother in years. You talked last night. We did. It wasn't comfortable. No. But it was honest. She looked toward the empty road. I canceled the location service on her phone. Caleb nodded. How'd that go? I didn't tell her. He raised an eyebrow. I just deleted it. Why? Because if I asked first, she'd think I was asking permission. And if I told her afterward, she'd think I wanted credit. So I just stopped. Caleb smiled. Sometimes the right thing doesn't need an audience. Claire laughed quietly. I suppose not. A few moments later she reached into her coat pocket and removed a folded sheet of paper. I almost brought this yesterday. Caleb unfolded it. It was a professional vehicle safety assessment form with blank signature lines. I wanted you to sign it. I figured. I was convinced it would help me. She looked embarrassed. But the truth is... She took a deep breath. I wanted someone else to carry the responsibility. Caleb folded the paper and handed it back. That's a heavy thing to ask from anybody. I know. She accepted it without argument. I won't ask again. There was relief in those words. Not because she had given up. Because she had finally stopped trying to solve her fear through someone else's authority. Before leaving, Claire paused beside the garage door. My mother still wants to drive to Cincinnati. I know. I'm still terrified. I know. She looked at Caleb, searching for certainty one last time. So what would you do if you were me? Caleb thought carefully before answering. I'd tell her exactly what scares me. Claire nodded. And then? And then I'd let her answer. She smiled, though her eyes were still damp. I've spent my whole career believing leadership meant having the final word. What if it doesn't? Caleb picked up the wrench lying on the workbench. What if sometimes leadership means trusting someone you can't control? Claire stood silently for several seconds. Then she thanked him and walked back toward her SUV. As she drove away, Caleb noticed Noah watching from the office window. Dad? Yeah? You helped her. I hope so. You didn't fix her problem. No. Noah smiled. You just stopped trying to fix people. Caleb chuckled softly. That's probably the first smart repair I've made all week. He didn't realize it yet, but the hardest conversation was still waiting. This time, it wouldn't be about fear. It would be about whether love could survive after trust had been broken. Friday arrived with clear skies and a cold wind that carried the last of the autumn leaves across Main Street. Caleb closed the garage an hour earlier than usual. Not because business was slow. Because he had made a promise, to Noah, to himself, and, in a way, to the lesson he'd been learning ever since Margaret's car rolled into his shop. He refused 2 late repair requests without apologizing for it. The world, he realized, would keep turning. Dad? Noah called from the office, holding up his backpack. Are we really going to the orchestra concert? We're really going. Noah smiled. I still can't believe you closed early. I'm still getting used to it myself. The church auditorium was already filling when they arrived. Families greeted one another in the lobby while volunteers handed out programs. It wasn't a grand venue, just polished wooden pews, warm lights, and the familiar comfort of a small-town gathering. Margaret spotted them almost immediately. You made it. She hugged Noah first, then smiled warmly at Caleb. I wasn't sure you could get away. I almost talked myself out of it. I'm glad you didn't. A few minutes later, Claire walked through the entrance carrying no phone in her hand for the first time since Caleb had met her. She looked around until she found her mother. For a brief moment, neither moved. Then Claire crossed the room. I almost didn't come. Margaret smiled gently. I know. I wasn't sure if you wanted me here. I always want you here. Claire lowered her eyes. I just wasn't sure if you wanted me close. The words hung between them. Margaret reached out and took her daughter's hand. I never wanted distance. I wanted trust. Claire's eyes filled. I know. No. Margaret squeezed her hand softly. I don't think you did. They sat together for the concert, not because every problem had disappeared, but because either wanted fear to make another decision for them. The orchestra began with a quiet arrangement of Amazing Grace. No one spoke. Sometimes silence could heal when it wasn't hiding anything. After the final applause, people slowly gathered in the fellowship hall for coffee and homemade desserts. Claire stood beside the refreshment table, while Caleb poured 2 cups of coffee. I've been thinking about something you said. He looked over. Which part? Protection isn't the same thing as permission. She smiled faintly. I've repeated it to myself all week. And I realized I never actually asked my mother what would make her feel both safe and respected. What did she say? Claire laughed softly. I finally asked this morning. And she said she'd already thought about it. Caleb waited. She offered to schedule a complete driving evaluation with her physician every year. She also said she'd avoid long highway trips after dark. Claire smiled, shaking her head. I spent years trying to force solutions. She came up with one in 5 minutes after I finally listened. Across the room, Margaret was helping Noah choose between 2 slices of pie. Watching them, Claire continued quietly. I removed the tracking app. I told her yesterday. How did she take it? She cried. Claire swallowed hard. So did I. Not because either had won. Because either had realized how lonely the other had been. Just then Margaret joined them carrying 3 paper plates. I have an announcement. Claire looked nervous. Oh? Margaret smiled. I've decided to keep driving. Claire nodded slowly. I know. But, Margaret continued before anyone could react. Only after I complete the driving evaluation. I've already made the appointment. Claire blinked. You did? I did. And if the doctor believes I shouldn't be on the road anymore. She took a slow breath. I'll hand you the keys myself. Claire's eyes immediately filled with tears. You'd really do that? Yes. Not because you demanded it. Because it would be my decision. Claire couldn't speak. Instead, she stepped forward and embraced her mother. This time, Margaret hugged her back without hesitation. Nearby, Noah looked up at Caleb. They're both giving something up. Caleb smiled. That's usually what compromise looks like. No one's losing? No. They're choosing. Later that evening, outside beneath the crisp autumn sky, Claire walked Caleb and Noah to the parking lot. I keep thinking about the first day we met. The day Mom's car broke down. So do I. I came to your garage convinced I needed a mechanic. She smiled. It turns out I needed someone who wasn't afraid to tell me where my responsibility ended. Caleb shook his head. I didn't tell you what to do. No. You reminded me what I couldn't do. What was that? I couldn't love my mother by living her life for her. Caleb looked toward Noah, who was laughing with Margaret beside the pickup truck. For the first time in years, he understood the same truth applied to fathers. Children didn't need someone to remove every risk from the road ahead. They needed someone willing to walk beside them until they were ready to drive their own path. Winter arrived quietly. Not with a blizzard or dramatic headlines, but with frosted windshields, bare maple trees, and mornings when Caleb unlocked the garage wearing gloves before the heater finally chased the cold away. Life looked almost the same. The faded sign still read Mercer Auto Service. The coffee in the waiting room was still stronger than it needed to be. Customers still came in complaining about squeaky brakes and dead batteries. From the outside, nothing had changed. But the people inside had. One Saturday morning, Caleb flipped the sign to close much earlier than he would have a few months before. Noah walked out carrying a toolbox. You sure about this? Caleb smiled. What kind of father misses his kid's robotics competition twice? Noah laughed. Only once? Exactly. They climbed into the pickup together. This time, Caleb didn't spend the drive worrying about lost business. He spent it asking Noah about his project. Mostly, he listened. It turned out 12-year-olds had a lot to say when they believed someone genuinely wanted to hear it. A few days later, Margaret's familiar blue sedan rolled into the garage for a routine inspection. She stepped out wearing the same warm smile Caleb remembered from the first afternoon they had met. Just my annual checkup. For you or the car? Caleb joked. A little of both. She handed him an envelope. Caleb immediately raised an eyebrow. If that's money, I'm giving it back. Margaret laughed. I learned my lesson. Inside wasn't a check. It was a copy of her completed driving evaluation. Her physician had cleared her to continue driving with a few sensible recommendations: avoid long nighttime trips, keep regular vision appointments, and return for another evaluation the following year. I thought Claire would want to keep a copy. And I wanted you to have one too. You trust me that much? I trust your honesty. There is a difference. Caleb nodded. There certainly was. As he finished checking the tires, another vehicle pulled into the lot. Claire stepped out carrying 2 paper coffee cups. No leather folder. No stack of paperwork. No carefully rehearsed plan. Just coffee. I figured mechanics probably run on caffeine. They do. She handed Caleb 1 cup and walked toward her mother's car. You look good, Mom. I feel good. Claire smiled when Margaret handed her the doctor's report. I've already read it. I know. You still wanted your own copy. Margaret winked. I wanted to hand it to you myself. Claire folded the paper carefully before slipping it into her coat pocket. I've been trying something new. Oh? When I worry. She looked at her mother. I call instead of assuming. And? Sometimes she answers. Margaret laughed. And sometimes I don't hear the phone. They both smiled. There was still concern. Still disagreement. Still the ordinary friction that exists in every family. The difference was that fear no longer made every decision before either of them had the chance to speak. As Margaret prepared to leave, She reached into the back seat and pulled out a small pie. Noah immediately grinned. Apple? Of course. I've started making 2 every time now. Caleb accepted it with a laugh. I guess refusing payment turned into a pie subscription. The best kind of contract. Everyone laughed. Simple. Unforced. Real. Before getting into her car, Claire stopped beside Caleb. I used to think that call I made to you was about paying a debt. What do you think now? I think it was the first honest conversation I'd had with someone in a very long time. She looked toward her mother, who was patiently brushing a little snow off the windshield with an old scraper instead of waiting for someone else to do it. You never told me I was wrong for being afraid. No. You just refused to let fear become someone else's responsibility. Caleb looked across the parking lot at Noah, who was helping Margaret clear the last bit of snow from the rear window while she insisted she was perfectly capable of doing it herself. He smiled. My wife used to tell me something. Claire waited. She said the people we love aren't ours to control. They're ours to care for. He paused. I finally understand the difference. Claire nodded quietly. So do I. Margaret climbed into her sedan, rolled down the window, and waved before pulling carefully onto the road. No one rushed after her. No one checked a phone to see where she was going. They simply watched until the blue car disappeared beyond the curve. Caleb slipped an arm around Noah's shoulders as they headed back toward the garage. The phone call that had begun with a simple thank you had never changed his bank account, his business, or his address. It had changed something far more valuable. It reminded 4 ordinary people that love grows strongest not when it takes control, but when it leaves room for trust. And sometimes, the smallest act of kindness doesn't rescue someone's life. It simply gives everyone the courage to start living it a little differently.